Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of eDiscovery After Hours. My guest this week is Ellen Blanchard of T-Mobile. We talked about her studying in Japan, her semi-professional sports photography journey, the fact that she's worked in BigLaw for vendors and now in large-scale corporations. And she's also, by the way, been a founding member of 2 different 501c3s. So a really fantastic conversation. I know you're going to love it. Hey, if you are tracking document review projects in Relativity, Relativity is an excellent and powerful tool, but it's also really complex. And if you want a simple way to understand what's been found, when's it going to be done, what are the budget implications, and you want some automated QC stats without running them yourself or asking somebody else to do so, reach out to contact@discoverymaster.co. That's contact@discoverymaster.co. Schedule a demo today. Thanks a lot.
Time.
You don't know how to drink, your whole generation.
Drinks on the house.
Yes, sir.
No, wait a second. Drinks are 50% off.
Right.
No, wait a second. Double the price of everything.
And I work only 16 hours a day.
A union man only works 8 hours a day.
I belong to 2 unions.
And now, eDiscovery After Hours with your host, Ryan Short.
Ellen Blanchard, cheers. Thanks for joining me on eDiscovery After Hours. Cheers. Here we go.
Thanks for having me.
What are we drinking?
We're drinking a bramble, which is a gin drink mixed with typically blackberries, but a lot of times people put raspberries or things like that in it. And Bombay actually makes a specific bramble gin. Or you can just throw other stuff in.
So my mother-in-law introduced me. I was always a dark, like a bourbon and scotch and whiskey kind of guy. And when I was dating my wife, her mom drank gin and tonic. So when I went to the house and she's like, "Do you want a gin and tonic?" I said, "Of course, I would love one." So she kind of turned me on to those. I'd never heard of a bramble until we were chatting and like, "Hey, what are we drinking?" You can go down some real rabbit holes with all the different combos and liqueurs and everything.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different ones. So, but yeah, once I hit 21-ish, gin and tonics on the deck in Maine at my grandparents' house, and now my parents' house is, kind of the summer to me. And so it's definitely my go-to drink, but I have had fun sort of experimenting with different versions like brambles.
Yeah.
And things like that. Yeah,
that works. Now, is this, you mentioned a deck in Maine. Is that your background, your virtual background here? Is this like a family compound?
It is actually, although it was a different, my parents have 2 houses that are about 20 minutes apart. So it's a different house, but this is in fact the deck at my parents' current house, the one they spend like the winters in and stuff like that. Okay. So
they winter in Maine. Do they know that most people do the opposite?
Yes. Well, and they in fact spend all of the year in Maine unless they're here or in Seattle or traveling. But they spend most of the time there. It's just that they had. So my grandparents had a house in this tiny, tiny little lobstering village. And then my parents bought a house in that same lobstering village where we spent summers, like every summer growing up. And then when my dad finally actually officially retired, he sort of retired and unretired a handful of times. But when he actually retired, they decided that the house in the little lobstering village wasn't great for being there in the winter as they got older. And so they bought a house closer into town, although it's still on a dirt road and trees come down on it. But it does share a power grid with the hospital in town. So they rarely lose power, which I guess is the key thing up in Maine. But they'll send me pictures of snow and I'm like, and snow up to like the windows on my dad's truck. And I'm like, really? That's where you want to spend the winters? But
to each their own. I have seen Maine from New Hampshire. There's a bridge you can drive across or walk across. I've seen it and I've waved, but I never crossed the bridge. So I'll have to get back out there. Okay. So Ellen, you actually grew up in Ohio, correct?
I went to high school and college in Ohio, and I spent time in Massachusetts and Delaware, but those sort of formative years in Ohio, definitely.
Yeah, and you've been from coast to coast, right? You grew up in Ohio, summer in Maine, school in DC, worked in Seattle. So, I talked to Cheryl Young from Rico recently, and she talked about growing up in Hawaii and the culture shock of moving to the mainland. I mean, you've probably had your own elements of culture shock, not even leaving the continent, going to all of these different places. But one thing that caught my eye was in your Ohio days, you were a gymnastics coach.
Yes. Yeah. There was a gym in between kind of my parents' house and school, and they initially needed an office manager. And I was like, this is great as a college student. Like, and no matter where I was, I could, easily get to work and stuff. And then they decided that it would be good if I knew how to start classes in case it was too late or something like that. But I loved it. I loved just kind of helping the kids. I couldn't do anything. The other coaches were the ones that could do, all of the demonstrating of things and stuff like that. But I at least, could help the kids on learning the different moves. And I also worked a lot with really little ones. So 2 and 3 and 4-year-old ones, which was a ton of fun.
Yeah. So it's less gymnastics and more just make sure a kid doesn't fall off a trampoline and break a neck.
Pretty much. Yeah. A little bit corralling and stuff. Although I did work with kind of some of the pre-team kids and stuff like that too. So they kind of knew a lot, and then they were just transitioning into a full team program. So that was good too, because it was a good mix of they weren't super advanced, but they knew a lot of the basics. So
I thought you were going to tell me that gymnastics was this lifelong dream, and you were training for the Olympics and all this. This is just a family friend who had a gym and was here, work the front desk.
Yes. Yeah, pretty much. It was just, do this. My lifelong dream would be to be a photographer, but I can't quite figure out how to do that and pay the bills. So I'm a lawyer.
Yeah. But so that's another one of your, so for those who don't know, and we'll get into it a little bit later, you spent 14 or 15 years in BigLaw, and then you went to the dark side. You became a vendor. I say that facetiously, folks, since I technically am one.
That's what I say, though. I call it the dark side too. So it's totally
so we'll get to that. And now you work for large corporations. So I'll be excited to hear kind of the compare and contrast later, but we'll kind of table that to the end because I want to work up towards that. But so you had referenced photography. So of the many adventures that you've had, you've been a credentialed photographer for multiple professional sports teams. That's incredible. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's one of those super lucky to be in the right place at the right time. I did, and I still do, a lot of nature photography, landscapes, animals, and things like that. A friend of mine had a hockey blog. And he actually connected with Ted Leonsis when he owned the Capitals. And so they wrote basically the guidelines on how bloggers could get access to the press room and become kind of credentialed writers for different, for hockey and initially Capitals. But then he also worked with the NHL to draft kind of their provisions for everybody. And he decided he wanted a photographer. And I was super lucky. I ran into him at a party and he was like, wait, you're a photographer. How do you feel about hockey? And I love sports, gymnastics, but also growing up in Ohio, I'm a huge football fan and hockey, lacrosse, pretty much everything. And so I was like, yeah, that'd be great. And so for the first season, it was, I just had kind of credentials for certain games and things. And then from there, at the next couple of seasons, I had full season credentials, and we kind of took that and did got credentials for DC United and for the Bay Sox, which is the Major League Lacrosse team in Baltimore. And then I got to do a couple one-offs, which were really cool, like the Do Tour, and I did this professional bull riding at the stock show in Denver. So it was so much fun. I miss doing that. So. Oh,
that's awesome. So is it just the nature photography now, or do you still do professional engagements like that?
No, it's when I moved, obviously there was no NHL team here until just recently. So I had to unfortunately give up those credentials. And then there were kids. And so there's lots of my own kid pictures and things like that. And I'm just slowly now getting back into some of the nature photography and things like that too. So.
Yeah, it's literally eDiscovery After Hours. It's 8:13 p.m. Eastern time as we record this. And I'm hearing like a herd of elephants upstairs. which it's supposed to be 3 girls under the age of 7 who are sleeping, and evidently none of them are. So kids, they tend to, your schedule gets affected. You said you have 2, right?
Yep. Yeah, I have a 12-year-old girl who's in 7th grade, and then a 7.5-year-old boy who is in 2nd grade.
Okay.
I remember this summer doing a virtual CLE presentation, and I hadn't gotten the chance to run up and remind them that I was going to be recording the presentation. And because I was having technical issues, and then that was the time when they chose that they were going to play soccer in the hallway. And all I can hear is it sounds like elephants. And I'm like, I don't even know what to do with this.
I have we've been back in the office since June of 2020, because most of us at our trifecta of companies have young families. And we're like, there's no such thing as working from home when you've got, toddlers and newborns and elementary school age kids. And so I hand wrote this recording, do not enter, to kind of make it look like a professional studio. People are still like, he's just joking, right? We can come in here. So there's some false start. Do you remember in 2017 or 2018, the CNN correspondent whose kid comes barging in, and then his wife just swoops in with the most acrobatic move ever, and just swooped the kid and was right back out. And it was international news.
It was everywhere.
Yeah. And then in 2020, we were just like, that's Tuesday.
Yeah. I still remember early on, in April or May of 2020, and it must have been May. And I was, my daughter was home, and their school did an amazing job. They still did art classes, and they had music classes. And we were lucky from that perspective. But one of their projects was a paper mache mask. And I hate paper mache. Of all the sort of, art formats, that is one I have. And so we had stalled on doing it. We were now at that point where she was like, we have to get this done so it can dry in enough time. And so we both had a half hour free in between, classes and meetings. It's okay, we'll just knock it out right now. And so we got most of the way done, just a little bit. And I had a meeting, but it's a team meeting. I was like, oh, no big deal. I don't need to be on camera. It'll be fine. Well, I ended up getting asked a question, and it was a question I felt like I couldn't answer off camera. And so I turned my camera on, and this was weeks after we had officially closed our merger with Sprint. And so half the people on this call, had never met me before. And I'm literally covered in paper mache, gooey paper mache. So I was just as you can tell, I talk with my hands. So the chances of me at some point sharing this, so I start off my, answering questions, before we start, just so you know, I'm covered in paper mache, which I absolutely hate as much as I love the kids' school. And then I answer the question, and then I went off camera. But that was so early on. And now I think if it happened, I probably wouldn't even say anything, because we're so used to having, I shared an office with my son for 1.5 years. We're so used to the kids being around.
Oh, wow. I think paper mache and glitter should both be illegal. Yeah,
absolutely.
Especially at home. Yeah. I mean, just, federal law tomorrow, that's a bipartisan issue. Any congressperson or senator who's ever had a child would just sign on. Let's amend the Constitution for all I care.
You instantly get votes. I mean, this is an easy road into office if you agree to ban glitter, right?
Yeah, that's right. All right. So there's 2 other, there's something I want to get to before that. When you were in school, you spent a semester in Japan, right?
Yep.
So how old were you, and how did that trip come about? Tell us more about that.
So I actually done it. I studied there twice. So in college, I was a Japanese studies major in undergrad. I knew I wanted to go to law school, but I went to Ohio Wesleyan, and they actually have a really strong kind of Japanese studies program there. The Honda plant is really close by. Yep. And so So the high school I went to, my dad was the headmaster of my high school, and they were establishing a sister school relationship with a school in Japan this summer after I graduated high school. So my parents and I went over, there was this whole big signing ceremony, and I just fell in love with Japan. Came back, was studying at Ohio Wesleyan, just had decided I was going to be a Japanese studies major, and I was going to study abroad. there. So my fall semester, my senior year, I studied about halfway between Kyoto and Osaka, which is great because Osaka is like Chicago, right? It's not as big as New York. And as much as I love New York, it can be overwhelming. So it's that small. And then Kyoto's everything about the kind of the history and the tradition and the culture and things like that. So it was a perfect place to spend a semester abroad there. And then when I was in law school, I went back and spent a summer kind of session essentially between my second and third year of law school, studying the Japanese legal system with the idea that at some point, somehow that would play into what I do. Which clearly I do eDiscovery. So I'm not sure that that's happened yet. Still fingers crossed, and now my Japanese is so rusty, that's what I'd have to do to get it back. So
well, I was just going to ask if you learned to speak the language. So obviously, yes. Now Japanese is a tonal language, correct?
Right.
So
yeah.
They're notoriously difficult for Westerners. How, tell me about the process of learning Japanese, because I could survive in a Spanish speaking country. I couldn't debate, religion or politics, but I could get by. Right. Yeah. But a tonal language, it just intimidates me.
Yeah. Although, it's funny. So I was in the car with the kids today and my daughter was talking about Australia and said it was in the Southern Hemisphere. And I was like, well, that's an odd way to say it, except if you say South and you add, it's Southern, not Southern, right? And so if you think about the English language, there's so many weird pronunciations for things and things spelled the same way. But so the actual kind of phonetic, this is the way it sounds and the way it's spelled is crazy. The real challenge with Japanese, and so when I was there in college, my host family, I think in hindsight, probably pretended that they didn't speak English as well as they probably did. And so we would just talk in Japanese. And so, 3 years of Japanese versus that semester, I learned so much more in, the 6 months that I was there. And we would just talk after dinner and we'd have a translator if we needed it or a dictionary, but it was, it was great. And my host mother would put up Post-it notes around the house with the names of things and stuff. The challenge is reading, right? Because kindergarten level reading is 4,000 kanji and I know 100, right? And so you don't get that reinforcement of being able to read in the language easily, right? Or being able to look at a word and kind of deciphering it. Now, there's a lot of things like the train stations and the bookstores and that have the English kind of characters and the Japanese name, but the English characters. And that actually is, super helpful, but it's, so it is, you get rusty and things like that. And I went back when I was doing that law school program, I went and visited them. And my Japanese was a bit rusty and they clearly spoke more English than they'd ever let on to me when I was living with them originally, which was actually, fantastic. So.
Oh yeah. Well, that's what I found when I've traveled, right, especially again to somewhere, Spanish speaking or, I was going to Rome and Assisi. So I learned some rudimentary Italian. I don't want to be one of these arrogant Americans, right? But then I've found that no matter where I go, everybody wants to practice their English on me. And I'm like, no, stop. I want to, so it's a real, the first world problems.
We did, for our honeymoon, we did a cruise to Spain and Italy and stayed a couple days on either side of that. And the same thing, we had the, phrase books and I had 7 years of high school Spanish but no, they're and I feel as long as I tried a little bit, then they were ready to speak English. If you just dove right into the English, then they were I don't understand. So,
yeah.
But that's been the great part about kids, right? My kids take Spanish in school. And so my daughter and I will we played Go Fish in Spanish the other day and things like that to try to I'm like, okay, there are pieces of this that are coming back slowly.
Right. So my oldest daughter is in kindergarten and we're homeschooling. And my wife is doing, all of the hard work. But I was like, wouldn't it be fun if I did Spanish with her? Because, I could survive, but it would be really cool to watch a child from a young age when their brain is such a sponge, just grasp onto this stuff and grow to be so confident. Right. And let's be honest, I could use the refresher from time to time. So I think we're going to go down the road. We'll see. Check back with me in 6 months and I'll tell you if I chicken out or not.
Awesome. Okay, I will definitely do that. Right.
So, all right, Ellen, outside of the office, you've stayed busy, as we've quite clearly covered. You're a wife, you're a mother, you've, got this photography thing that you've done, global world traveler. And you've also been the founding member of at least 2 different 501c3s. So there's the Conservation College and Mamas. So tell me about each of those.
Sure. There's a camp here and a school and things like that called Wolf Camp that my daughter went to. That's an outdoor survival camp, and the founders of that are just the most amazing couple, and they're great with the kids, and it's a fantastic program. And so they are getting older and wanted to step back. And so they were looking to sort of figure out how to turn, what had been kind of their, baby and their project into something that was, kind of sustainable long-term, even if they were stepping back. And so we had started the Conservation College. Unfortunately, COVID kind of, sort of put a halt to it, just because, no one was sure what was going to happen last year and things like that. And so, I've kind of passed on the torch to other people. So hopefully now that things are, settling down, now that we've got, the 5 and ups vaccinated and things like that, they'll be able to kickstart that. But it's just, the part of the move to Seattle, as you mentioned, I've been, lived all over the place, but part of the move to Seattle was that, ability to be in the outdoors with the kids and stuff like that. So that was good. And then Mama Seattle was actually started by a group of just amazing women attorneys who just realized that mother attorneys need a way to network and connect with other attorneys differently, right? It's really hard to do a happy hour at 6 o'clock when your daycare closes at 6:30. And so they had started the one in Seattle with the idea of, kind of making family friendly networking events on the weekends, having CLEs and luncheons, during the week at lunchtime when, women can, more mothers can be there. And also just providing a resource like, hey, I'm nursing and I'm going to the courthouse. Like, is there a room that I can go to? Or, what do I do? I'm, about to go on maternity leave and I've got this case. Like, how do I do it? So being able to ask those questions, but also just business development, right? I'm now a partner at a law firm, and how do I connect with people? In fact, I got my job through Mamas, right? Like a woman who was in-house at T-Mobile knew that their eDiscovery person was leaving, and, put my resume in and connected me that way. So it was a great opportunity to network. We then started getting outreach from other cities asking, how do we start a chapter there? And so I was part of the group that started Mama USA, which the goal of that is to kind of create this, umbrella organization. There's a number of chapters in different cities already, but trying to create a kind of umbrella organization. So that way, again, like I've got this case that's, and I need local counsel in Denver. Can I go to somebody who's part of Mamas and things like that? So, super, super excited to be part of that organization.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, with 3 daughters, I fully endorse Mamas. Well, if I get sophisticated enough, one day I'll link in the comments below.
That'd be great.
All right. So then I guess we'll end here, and then I'm going to turn it over to you for your industry soapbox. But let's circle back to your comments about having spent a long time in BigLaw and then going to the vendor side and now being in-house. Would love to hear kind of a distillation, of your professional journey and kind of how you compare and contrast each, and how, being on all these different sides of the equation, so to speak, how has that either reinforced perceptions that you had or maybe reformed some perceptions that you had?
Yeah. Nothing like the easy questions at the end. What? No, I really I sort of envision the kind of eDiscovery projects as being a 3-legged stool, right? We really need the outside lawyers. They have the, they're close to the knowledge of the law and where things are going with, what judges are saying and things like that. I need our tech partners, and we really consider those, the vendors that we work with. I always call them tech partners, because if they're not a partner to us, I don't want to work with them. And so I really rely on them heavily for their expertise from the technology side of things, and also best practices. What are other, we've got a second request. What are they dealt with in other second requests and things like that. And so that expertise. And then obviously in-house, right? We know the business, we know the people, we know the types of documents we have. And the three of us, kind of groups need to work really closely together and in a very balanced way. And so having had the experience of being, at a firm, being on the dark side, and now being in-house, I do think that that's given me an opportunity to have that kind of holistic, perspective on things. I fell into eDiscovery. I think most of us probably did. And I was at Boyce Schiller and Flexner, and I got pulled into some eDiscovery, like literally handed like a set of discs and like a SCSI drive, set of like tower that was like, there's a production on here. Please go figure out how to make this work. And I was on the phone with Concordance. I was on the phone with DocuLex, but I loved that intersection between technology and the law. And then I had, clients that I worked with and things. And so to make the jump from there to a tech partner that we were working with, and actually on a case that I had been working on for a few years and continued working on for another couple of years, was an easy jump to then see, this like this probably won't come as a surprise to anybody that knows me well, but I'm a bit of a control freak. And so the idea of being, kind of a PM and not having enough, really being the one to make decisions didn't sit particularly well, which is actually why my husband was worried about me moving from the very fast-paced East Coast to the much more laid-back Northwest. But it was that opportunity to move in-house and to really get the opportunity, not just to sort of come up with a solution for an in-house problem, but to actually see it all the way through, was really it's fascinating to me, right? When I was at Boyce Schiller, we would advise clients on, best practices and things, and we might even stand up a project or, an in-house workflow with them, but you never got to see it and how it really played out and make those little tweaks that you get to do, being in-house and things like that. So I love being in-house, although there's pieces I miss to, being outside counsel as well. So
do you feel that, generally speaking, do you feel that in-house legal teams either have a bigger role to play or are attempting to play a bigger role in integrating, tech partners, as you call them, ALSPs, eDiscovery, providers, whatever terminology people use, right? And of course, there's CLM providers. There's no shortage of legal support vendors. I think eDiscovery is the tip of the spear in terms of the maturity and the familiarity in the marketplace. So keeping the topic focused on the little niche that you and I work in, do you think it's incumbent on in-house teams to kind of make their law firms and ALSPs play nice, or are you of the frame where you're just like, hey, like we've got our own problems, you guys need to figure this out? Because there's this little detente, right, where law firms and ALSPs often view each other as competitors, and that drives me nuts. I hate that, right? I mean, ALSPs have the ability to make law firms so much more valuable, in my opinion, but oftentimes lack the market impact, market influence to do so. Yeah. Your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I mean, I spend a lot of time sort of reminding people that they need to play nice in the sandbox together, and that we are hiring each of them for their expertise. And the fact is that there are litigators that are also great discovery attorneys, and that really love talking about it, but a lot of them don't. Right. And that's fine. There's, that's why we have patent lawyers and why we have, trust and estates lawyers and family lawyers and discovery attorneys. And so they don't need to have that expertise. What drives me crazy is when they're not relying on the people that do have that expertise. Right. And and that is the part where often I find that I have to step in and say, no, you really do need to listen to our tech partner when they're saying this. And there's a number of times where I jump in and say, hey, yes, I agree with what the tech partner is saying and stuff like that. But I will say that I only have to do that a few times before before the tech partner kind of is able to just show what a great partner they are to the firms as well. And so, every time we get a new firm or a new partner on a case that hasn't worked with us before, I may have to do that same sort of, have that same conversation. But in general, we get to the point because we hire tech partners that, really do know their stuff and really can be a true partner. And it, falls under the, ABA guidelines, right? I mean, they say you don't have to know everything. You just have to hire somebody that does and partner with them. So right. I try to do that. And I do think that my, in my BigLaw life and, kind of history helps me be able to say to them, look, I've been in your shoes, and I understand what it's like being at a firm, but here's the reality is that, we need to work on this together and things like that too. So,
yeah. Well, thank you for indulging me. And at this point, I owe it to turn the floor over to you. What's something industry specific that's been on your mind recently?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're really kind of at this sort of precipice, right? Of like, we're making this shift that to different forms of technology, collaboration tools, text messages, over the top messaging applications, WhatsApp and things like that. Right. And much like that shift from paper to email, which I will admit I saw, kind of I'm old enough to have seen most of that, where the fact is, kind of the business is changing what they're using and what they're doing. And we need to, in our space, sort of catch up with that. And right. And the law needs to shift to kind of address those collaboration tools and things like that, both in terms of just the sheer number of messages. I mean, we send billions of messages a day on Slack around the world. And there's really very little guidance about, like answering questions like, what is a complete record? We've answered that for emails, just like we'd answered that for paper documents. But I don't know what a complete record is when I have to produce Slack channels, right? How do I define a custodian? If I say I'm going to collect this custodian's data, is that, and they use Slack. So does that mean every channel they're a member of, or does that mean only messages where they're either an active participant or, somebody's like posted at this particular custodian? And what is the time period being? Because a lot of times, messages start and stop. So if I say, okay, I've got this message that's in our relevant time period, 6 months or 2 years or whatever it is, but it really is a follow-on to a conversation that happened outside that relevant period. What's my obligation to go back and grab that? And so I think, we're right at the point where we, need the guidance from the court, need the guidance from Sedona, from some of, EDRM, some of the other organizations to really, provide that. So I think we have an opportunity to really guide how that is. So that's super exciting for me, right? To be able to say, okay, what is this? What do we want this to look like? How do we, make that happen? And then the other piece of it is, what do I need to do in-house to train people, right? Because when we first saw emails, a lot of people had stuff in emails that you would never want in front of the judge or the press or anybody, right? And you had to train people like, hey, you know what? These emails are responsive and they're discoverable. And they, so only put an email what you would be okay, sharing with your mother at your Thanksgiving table, right? And so we're now there with Slack and text messages in that they're fully discoverable. The government agencies, the DOJ is asking for them every single time. They're asking for text messages. And if you don't have it, they are pushing really hard on why you don't have that. And so we need to get people used to the idea that this is discoverable. So they need to think about what they're putting in them. They also, if we send a litigation hold, that they're adding, they're thinking about, oh yeah, I need text messages. What does this mean for Slack? What does this mean, that I need to, what settings do I need to change? All of those things. I think it's a big issue because we're also faced with, with text messages as a company, even though if I'm looking for business communications that are in somebody's text messages, I don't necessarily have the authority from the court to go get it because of all the privacy rules that are in place. And that, even in the US, but then when you look at GDPR issues and in China and things like that, I have even less ability to go and get those messages. And yet I'm still being held accountable for having them. And so I think we're going to see, much like in 2015, where we moved to, proportionality standard, I hope that we're going to see in the next couple of years something that really gives us, more clarity around the collaboration tools. Otherwise, I'm negotiating that for every single case. And
I couldn't have said it better. And I think the real crux of the matter is the commingling of the personal business data in an unprecedented manner.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, a lot could be said and has been said and will be said about that. But yeah, very, very well said. Ellen, thank you so much. This was absolutely fantastic. And it went in longer than these episodes normally do because I was having a good time and I didn't even get to all my bullet points. So anyway, you'll get to have dinner at a decent time and I'll have to follow up with you outside of the episode.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for apparently letting me ramble a lot. This is fantastic. So much fun.
Hey, cheers.